Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. Turbulence ahead. Between 1968 and 1973, referred to as the golden age of aircraft hijacking, 348 flights were hijacked. Over half of these hijackings occurred in Central and South American countries, with most planes diverted towards communist Cuba. In Colombia alone, there were 17 hijackings. One of these was South America's longest hijacking, and this is its story. The story begins at the house of senior flight attendant Edelma. Edelma is a single mother of 3 boys and is running late for her flight. She cannot find her shoe, and her babysitter has not arrived yet. Her son asks for the flight number again, and Edelma says, 601. Her youngest son, Boris, does not want to eat eggs. Just then, she receives a call to be picked up, but Edelma decides to take a taxi to the airport. William, her eldest son, tells her that her shoe is in the fridge. Robert, another son, cracks an egg on Boris's head. Boris locks himself in the bathroom, crying. Edelma warns him to come out, but when he does not, she forces the door open, accidentally hitting him in the face and injuring him. Meanwhile, in the parking lot of El Dorado Airport, 2 young men in cheap suits sit in a small car. One tapes a pistol to his thigh. They retrieve a large gift box from the back seat and head towards the airport. Toro, one of them, glances back at his partner, who collides with an Aero Believer flight attendant. She directs him to his gate, but he does not respond. At the same time, Boris has lost a tooth due to the door incident, and Edelma frantically searches for it. Her doctor insists, it's a matter of life and death, for the tooth to be put back in place. In the dressing room of the Aero Believer flight attendants, someone has sent flowers to Barbara, a flight attendant. However, she dislikes the sender. Their strict supervisor, Miss Manchola, inquires about Edelma's whereabouts. Barbara tries to cover for her, but Miss Manchola, an experienced supervisor, informs Edelma that there's no replacement for her and she must also train a new flight attendant for her flight, scheduled to depart at 8:10. If Edelma doesn't arrive in time, she'll have to find a new job. Barbara offers to complete the boarding process in her place. At the airport, a security guard observes Toro's brown pants and white socks, but Toro remains calm and the guard lets him through. Inside Flight 601, the experienced pilot Captain Richard Wilches jokes with his first officer, Guillermo, while keeping him on task. Edelma's babysitter does not show up and she entrusts her children to William. Before leaving, Boris stops her to draw a dot on their wrists, a pre-flight ritual they share. Toro and his partner nervously wait at the boarding gate. Captain Wilches orders the boarding of Aero Believer Flight 601 to begin. Barbara recognizes Toro's partner but receives no response. Boarding is completed, and Barbara gives the new flight attendant some advice before leaving. Whatever happens, keep smiling. Meanwhile, Edelma rushes to catch her flight, falling and stumbling along the way. She meets Barbara at the gate, who informs her she's too late. Edelma watches her job flying away as the plane takes off. Miss Manchola makes this good new official. Edelma belittles her as mayor secretary to the director, who does not have power to fire her. Inside Flight 601, the seatbelt sign turns off, and the smoking sign is lit. A norm back then. Toro's partner goes to the restroom to retrieve his pistol. He asks the new flight attendant to prepare 2 cups of coffee and bring them to the cockpit. When the cockpit door opens, the hijacker points his gun at Captain Wilches, demanding the plane divert to Medellin for refueling before heading to Cuba. The new flight attendant, in panic, rushes to the cabin and screams that everyone is going to die. Toro calms the passengers and reveals a large weapon from a box. Chaos ensues, and Captain Wilches realizes Barbara is not on board. After things settle, the flight is diverted to Medellin. Back at the airline office, Edelma storms into Director Piratik's office, furious about being fired. She accuses Miss Manchola of smuggling olives, almonds, and whiskey. Impressed by Edelma's determination, Piratik reinstates her position and offers her Aero Believer chocolates as a token. But the moment of happiness doesn't last long. Manchola enters the cabin to announce that Flight 601 has been hijacked. Piratik asks how many people are on board. Manchola replies, 43 passengers and 3 crew members, including the only flight attendant, and it's her first flight. Piratik wants to know where the second flight attendant is. Edelma says, here. Hearing this, Piratik immediately fires her, leaving Edelma, a single mother of 3 children, devastated. The stress is too much for the sole flight attendant on the hijacked flight, and she faints. Captain Wilches tells the first officer to call operations and request Caribbean and Central American charts. Additionally, the hijackers are demanding a new attendant. In the dressing room, Piratik tries to rally the girls, but they're uninterested. Finally, Piratik gets to the point and tells them, using a code number, that Flight 601 has been hijacked. Manchola explains the problem, blaming Adelma for the sole inexperienced attendant on board, who is now unconscious. The hijackers have demanded a new attendant in Medellin. The girls joke about submitting their resignation letters the next morning. Suddenly, a voice from the back of the room says, "I'll do it." It's Adelma, ready to risk her life for her children. However, she demands a 5-year contract. After some negotiation, they settle on a 3-year contract. Adelma calls home to check on her children. William tells her the babysitter hasn't arrived, but there are 7 packed lunchboxes in the fridge. Adelma instructs him to take care of his siblings and informs him that her flight has been rescheduled and she won't be home that night. William assures her he'll handle everything. In Medellin, refueling of Flight 601 begins. Captain Wilches tells the hijacker it will take 2 hours. The hijacker, unfamiliar with aviation, insists they only have 30 minutes. Captain Wilches tries to explain that such limited fuel won't even take the plane out of the country. The hijacker grudgingly gives him an hour. Adelma is flown to Medellin on a private plane, where she meets Barbara, whose flight has been cancelled. Barbara wants to join Adelma on Flight 601. Adelma explains she is only doing this for her 3 children, who have just 7 lunchboxes at home, and if she loses her job, she doesn't know where the next meal will come from. Barbara insists that the flight needs 2 attendants. Finally, Adelma agrees. After refueling, Adelma and Barbara board Flight 601 via a rooftop ladder. The hijackers, armed, are not pleased to see them. Captain Wilches explains he added the attendants for the passengers' convenience. One hijacker warns him that any more heroic actions will result in a bullet to his head. Toro orders Adelma and Barbara to leave, but his partner refuses, reasoning that thanks to the captain's foolishness, they now have 2 extra hostages. Flight 601 takes off again, but not towards Cuba. The hijacker provides new coordinates that surprise Captain Wilches. Adelma, who left her 3 boys at home, finds a daughter on the flight, who proves to be a handful. Adelma takes her to the restroom, only to encounter another problem. This problem had entered the restroom when Toro's partner had left with the gun. Adelma convinces Toro to allow passengers to use the first-class restroom, as the other one's water supply isn't functioning. Toro grudgingly agrees but tells them to sit quietly since it's just a 30-minute flight to Cuba. Toro's partner reveals that they are hostages of the Revolutionary People's Front and are heading to Aruba. They declare that the oppressive government must bow to their demands and listen to the common man. If the president doesn't comply, the flight attendants will become martyrs for the revolution. Both hijackers chant, "Revolution or death." Adelma and Barbara begin regretting their decision to volunteer. In the Aero Bolivar boardroom, Piertek informs the team that the government will only negotiate with the hijackers if they begin releasing hostages. As for the hijackers' demand for $200,000, Aero Bolivar will bear the cost. The board chairman refuses, stating he has to attend his daughter's party. Piertek argues that passenger safety is Aero Bolivar's responsibility, calling the chairman a fool. Manchola arrives with news from Aruba. Piertek convinces the board members to sell 10% of the chairman's shares to meet the hijackers' demands. Captain Wilches skillfully lands the plane in Aruba. Adelma tries to contact the captain, but the hijacker handcuffs him before she can get a response. Meanwhile, Piertek searches for his bravery tonic in his office, only to discover that Manchola has hidden them. She knows Piertek needs it urgently but decides he'll only get them if he lets the government handle the situation. Piertek sees this as his golden opportunity. If he can free the hostages, he believes he'll one day own Aero Bolivar. He plans to make the negotiations with the hijackers a public spectacle. Manchola, however, knows Piertek may need his tonic at any moment. Piertek tells the hijacker that he is the company's director and is willing to negotiate. The hijacker responds that he will only speak with a government minister. Piertek explains that the government will only engage in negotiations if the hostages are released. The hijacker expresses distrust in the corrupt president and refuses to release any hostages. Piertek asks for the hijacker's name, and he replies, Ulysses. Piertek offers $50,000 for the release of any one hostage within an hour. Ulysses rejects the offer, insisting on speaking with a government minister and demanding $400,000 within 4 hours. In the back of the plane, Adelma listens to the entire conversation from the cockpit and begins devising a plan. She approaches a passenger hiding in the restroom and persuades her to pretend to be pregnant, pleading for the sake of her 3 children. Outside, another passenger urgently needs to use the restroom. Seeing his distress, Toro allows him to use the working first-class restroom. A first-class passenger dislikes this and insists to Barbara that the restroom must be thoroughly cleaned afterward. Barbara makes an announcement over the PA system, asking the important first-class passengers to remain patient, explaining that the revolutionaries are fighting for the rights of the common man. Ulysses seems to admire Barbara's demeanor. Meanwhile, Edelma searches for a doctor among the passengers. Toro orders her to return to her seat, but Edelma insists there's a pregnant woman in need of medical attention. Ulysses demands to meet this passenger, only to discover that the first officer once trained to be a doctor before becoming a pilot. The first officer examines the passenger and quickly realizes the truth but plays along, stating that the woman must be taken to a hospital immediately. The news spreads across the plane, creating a tense atmosphere. Under pressure, Ulysses contacts Pirateke and Edelma explains the emergency. Pirateke promises to send an ambulance but is soon interrupted by Ulysses, who demands $400,000 for the release of the pregnant woman, giving only 3 hours to comply. Edelma begins blaming herself for the predicament. Meanwhile, Pirateke crashes a party uninvited, exaggerating the story and announcing that the hijackers are willing to release a pregnant woman but now demand $400,000. The chairman ridicules Pirateke and throws him out of the party. Not to be outdone, Pirateke secretly contacts a publicity-hungry journalist and leaks the breaking news to apply pressure on the chairman. Back on the plane, the passenger from the restroom emergency faces another crisis. A first-class passenger insults Barbara, humiliating her further. The tension escalates, and hostages begin fighting among themselves. A passenger soils himself, adding to the chaos. Barbara, deeply hurt by racist remarks from the first-class passenger, reflects on her journey from poverty to her current situation, only to face such indignities again. Meanwhile, Ulysses invites Marulanda, a journalist, onto the plane, impressed by his news coverage. Marulanda sees this as a golden opportunity. Tearing down the first-class curtain, Ulysses declares, "This is the wall separating the rich and the poor. Our revolution is for the common man." He then demands the release of some prisoners and $400,000 as ransom. Edelma takes full advantage of the situation and diverts Marulanda's attention to the pregnant passenger. Seeing her condition, Marulanda begins attacking the government, questioning why negotiations with the hijackers haven't progressed. Ulysses turns off Marulanda's camera, but Pirateke, now emboldened, starts drinking openly and gains confidence. Using the pregnant woman and the media as leverage, he manages to bring Ulysses to agree to a compromise: $200,000 within 3 hours. Toro warns that if they don't comply, he won't hesitate to start shooting, shouting, "Revolution or death." Pirateke holds a press conference and announces on the radio that $200,000 will be paid for the passenger's safety. The hijackers hear the announcement on the radio, and Ulysses declares that he will release the women and children. Suddenly, Pirateke becomes a hero. Marulanda begins a live broadcast about the news. Preparations to transfer the money start at the Aero Believer office. As the pregnant woman exits the plane to reach the ambulance, she feels Edelma should go with her for her children's sake. Barbara remains on the plane with the hijackers. On television, the president addresses the nation, declaring that no negotiations will be made with the hijackers, and anyone who negotiates with them will be considered their accomplice. William, Edelma's eldest son, hears this announcement. Before sending off the pregnant woman, Edelma writes Manchola's phone number on her hand to ensure her children are taken care of. However, the alcohol used in the ambulance wipes away the number. Edelma decides to return to the plane for Barbara's sake. Marulanda asks why she's returning when she has a chance to leave. William, listening to the radio, hears updates about his mother. Edelma responds, "My duty isn't over until the last passenger gets off the plane." Marulanda's crew abandons him as the story unfolds. Ulysses, keeping his word, asks Pirateke where his money is. Pirateke informs him that the president announced on television that there will be no negotiations with hijackers and that the army is on its way. Ulysses, enraged, loses his composure and blames Edelma, saying that she's the cause of everything. He declares she will be the first passenger to die. Ultimately, Ulysses chooses the father of the little girl as the first victim. Toro uses the cockpit radio to broadcast this news live to Pirateke. Ulysses drags the pleading hostage to the cargo hatch and shoots him. A heavy silence falls over the plane. Ulysses asks Pirateke, does he now understands the meaning of revolution or death? He warns that there are only 2 hours left to transfer the money, after which a massacre will begin on the plane. Pirateke says it will not be possible to deliver the money before 6 a.m. Ulysses declares he will not wait even a minute past 6 a.m., repeating, "Revolution or death." He orders the first-class cabin to be emptied, declaring that there will no longer be any discrimination on this plane. Captain Wilches contacts Edelma and tells her that none of what happened was her fault. He blames the government and the company for abandoning them to die but vows that they won't die without a fight. Edelma needs to find a way to get his handcuffs removed. Back at the Aero Believer office, Pirateke sits with the money, while the chairman confronts him, asking if he hasn't heard the president's statement. He orders the money to be returned to the safe and tells Pirotek to face the families of the hostages outside. At home, Boris has a fever and cries for Edelma, a feeling that Edelma also senses while on the plane. Barbara consoles her, and then her eyes fall on a bag. The bag of the novice attendant. She knows that most novices carry motion sickness tablets in their bags. Those pills can make a person drowsy. As expected, motion sickness tablets are found. In the Aero Boulevard office, the relatives of the hostages make Pirotek's life difficult. As per the president's orders, Pirotek cannot do anything, but his conscience seems to bother him. Once again, he takes solace in alcohol. Pirotek has a deadline of 6 a.m. All the passengers on the plane are hungry and thirsty. Taking the plight of the innocent hostages into account, Captain Wilches convinces Ulysses to arrange food and water. On the other hand, in the office, Pirotek, invoking his love, persuades Manchola to open the office safe. Both of them know this step is illegal. In Aruba, food and water are unloaded on the tarmac. Edelma informs the co-pilot that they have managed to get their hands on sleeping pills. The co-pilot tells her he brought along a technical manual that could help open the escape hatch at the back of the plane. Barbara and Edelma mix sleeping pills into some sandwiches. Toro refuses to take a sandwich, but Ulysses, impressed by Barbara, takes one. Edelma informs the passengers that once the seatbelt sign is on, they need to rush to the back of the plane. Barbara has Ulysses pass the sandwich to Toro as well. Edelma successfully manages to open the hatch following the instructions in the manual. Barbara tells Ulysses that she could read faces and has noticed sadness on his face. Ulysses clarifies that it is not sadness but the anger of someone whose childhood was spent in poverty and hunger. Captain Wilches says his childhood wasn't much different, but instead of getting angry, he chose to work hard. Ulysses asks if his mother also left him to die like his own mother. He mentions that in his life, he had only two choices, either to play football better than Pele or to pick up a gun. Barbara sides with Ulysses. When Wilches tries to provoke further, Toro holds him back. Ulysses intervenes and asks about Edelma, who is silently sitting in a corner doing her job and smartly signals something to Captain Wilches. Back at home, to break Boris' fever, they bathe him in cold water. The effect of the medicine begins to show on Ulysses. Barbara hands a screwdriver to Captain Wilches, to break the handcuffs at the first opportunity. Standing in the aisle, Toro also starts to tire. All the hostages eagerly wait for Captain Wilches' signal. Ulysses, in the washroom, and Toro in the aisle almost pass out. Captain Wilches drops the screwdriver. All the hostages' eyes are on the seatbelt sign, their eagerness growing. Finally, Captain Wilches succeeds in breaking the handcuffs. When Toro wakes up from his stupor, he finds Barbara heading to the back of the plane and Ulysses coming out of the washroom. Ulysses suggests Toro wash his face too, but Toro has something else on his mind. To keep themselves alert, both of them use coke, which foils Barbara's plan of putting them to sleep. Edelma informs Captain Wilches, who says they have only one option left, to launch an attack on them. When Barbara goes to alert the hostages, Ulysses humiliates her and sends her ahead again. Barbara's note contains a message to attack the hijacker in the back. Pirotek, risking his life, is busy delivering money. After the plane and the boat, it's now the road. He wants to reach the airport before 6 a.m. at any cost. On the plane, Ulysses informs Captain Wilches that only 20 minutes remain before their time runs out. Toro gets ready to kill, while the hostages manage to pull out the extinguisher from under the seat. The hostages are fully prepared to attack the hijackers. Just when Captain Wilches is about to turn on the seatbelt sign, they hear loud honking, the sound of a bike horn on the tarmac. Finally, before the deadline ends, the determined Pirotek arrives with the money. He calls out loudly for Ulysses, and upon seeing him, remarks that he's just a kid. Ulysses, ignoring the remark, sends someone to retrieve the money and it is Barbara again. Ulysses, pointing a finger at Captain Wilches, remarks that he was right, hard work always pays off. Barbara returns with the bag, which contains $50,000. For every 5 hostages released, another bag will be delivered. The hostages feel a glimmer of hope. Toro in the aisle, picks the first 5 hostages. In the cockpit, Ulysses throws the money at Captain Wilches' face, saying it's his reward for obedience. Captain Wilches, furious, turns on the seatbelt sign and jumps directly at Ulysses. In the aisle, the hostages spray a fire extinguisher on Toro's face. Edelma rushes to open the hatch at the back. During the scuffle between Wilches and Ulysses, a shot is fired. Chaos ensues as everyone struggles to exit the plane. Marulanda, climbing over others, is the first to get down. Upon descending, he informs a shocked Pirotek that he saved himself. Ulysses takes control of the gun and orders Wilches to start the engines, who flatly refuses. Ulysses shoots Guillermo in the leg, forcing Wilches to concede. At the back of the plane, The hostages continue to fall out of the hatch one by one. As the engines start, Pyroteka distances himself from the plane. One of the hostages escapes with Toro's gun. Ulysses frees Toro, who captures Adilma as she tries to flee. Desperate, Pyroteka stands alone on the tarmac with his bag of money. The scene shifts to a grim camp in the wilderness, far from the city. Here, the food rations are meager, with only small plates served. Poor players are groomed for football clubs to be sold off. Toro is a highly talented forward, while Ulysses is a goalkeeper. Football is their ticket out of poverty, and both pour their hearts into it. The camp owner informs Toro that a club has invited him for a trial. Knowing Toro is certain to be selected, the owner demands repayment of the money spent on him and his commission before the trial. The trials are 3 days away. Toro has no money and an injured leg. Ulysses promises him that he'll handle the money and urges Toro to focus solely on his game. Not wanting to disappoint Ulysses, Toro hides his leg injury from him. There's another player at the camp who knows a wealthy man. Ulysses asks for his help, and his teammate introduces him to a man called Professor, whose real name is Checho. Ulysses' real name is Eusebio. Checho enjoys partying with both girls and boys. Eusebio spends the night with him and is compensated the next morning. Before leaving, Eusebio notices Checho's revolutionary documents. Checho traps him, saying he has never met an educated football player before. Eusebio explains that he learned to read and write by reading Bible passages in the orphanage. Checho initially suspects him of being a government spy, but when Eusebio starts reciting Bible verses about hunger, Checho believes he truly is a poor orphan, and he tells Eusebio that he has narrowly escaped death. Checho adds that not all answers are in the Bible and hands over his documents to Eusebio. Back at the camp, Eusebio gives Toro his ticket to freedom. Now, nothing can stop Toro from attending the trials. Once again, Toro hides his leg injury. The condition of the players in the camp is deplorable, and Checho writes to awaken the poor. Eusebio realizes that to achieve freedom, they must fight for themselves. Toro continues battling his injury, and the long-awaited trial day finally arrives, a day that could change both Toro and Eusebio's lives. Despite his injury, Toro gives it his all during the trials. However, his injury soon becomes evident. Seeing his condition, Eusebio realizes that Toro will never be able to play football again, a fact later confirmed by the doctor. The camp owner learns that Toro hid his injury and, to recover his money, forces both Toro and Eusebio into labor. Eusebio, determined to escape this exploitation, takes Toro to Checho, stating they can no longer endure slavery. He wants to take his passport and return to his country. To do so, Eusebio asks Checho for weapons. It is revealed that Checho's real name is Ulysses. He calls Eusebio selfish and cowardly, accusing him of lacking the courage to fight his master. Toro tries to reason with him, but Eusebio is determined not to back down. Before entering the camp, Ulysses consumes coke, while Eusebio and Toro refuse to indulge. Ulysses hands them guns and sends them inside. Just as they are about to enter the camp's office, Ulysses arrives, with the camp owner. He is in no mood to listen to anything. As Eusebio and Toro are about to take their passports and leave, Ulysses fires a shot and begins delivering a revolutionary speech. He declares himself a member of the People's Republican Front and announces that he has come to punish the camp owner. The camp owner is left bewildered. Ulysses explains that this fight is for the revolutionary students who were abducted on president's orders and never seen again. He sentences the camp owner to death and incites Toro to shoot him, accusing the owner of ruining their lives. An agitated Toro pulls the trigger, but the gun is empty. Ulysses declares that Toro has passed the test and is now the master of his own destiny. For the first time in their lives, Toro and Eusebio feel powerful. Eusebio expresses his desire to return home, but Ulysses insists it's not time yet. At home, the three of them consume coke. Ulysses tears down a curtain, saying it is the wall separating the rich from the poor. He then starts talking about the hijacking plan. They will hijack a plane, free the students, and demand a ransom of $5 million. Toro and Eusebio are confused. Eusebio says he wants no part in any revolution. Ulysses argues that they are already revolutionaries, pointing out their actions at the camp as their first act of revolution with witnesses to prove it. Now they are fugitives from the law. Ulysses opens a box containing grenades and declares that their freedom awaits them in Cuba. Toro says he doesn't understand all this. He just wants to go home. Ulysses tells him that if he returns empty-handed, no one will listen to him, but if he takes a lot of money back, they will. Eusebio and Toro both know that this is the best offer they could get at the moment. Revolution or death. They decide to join Ulysses. Ulysses begins dancing with joy, and in his frenzy, accidentally shoots himself. Toro wants to run away, but Eusebio stops him. Eusebio takes Ulysses' identity and turns into the revolutionary Ulysses, who has no master. Both decide to go to Cuba, choosing revolution or death. They get ready and head to the airport. For Marulanda, it's as if he's hit the jackpot. Pirateke had tipped him off, Ulysses had called him onto the plane, and he managed to escape the plane because of Edilma. Yet, he takes all the credit for himself. He reveals that after Aruba, the plane had tried to land in 3 Central American countries but was denied permission. The president is still unwilling to negotiate with the hijackers. Due to the escape hatch being open, the cold air starts seeping into the plane. Guillermo states that the plane has undergone decompression. Edilma warns that if they don't land soon, they will all die of pneumonia. Captain Wilches requests permission to land in Lima, the capital of Peru. Upon receiving no response, he sends out a distress message and finally gets a reply, redirecting them elsewhere. Captain Wilches says they are running out of fuel and must land at any cost. He calls Guillermo, who has a gunshot wound, to the cockpit. The escaped hostages are given a grand welcome. Piratek informs Manchola that the pregnant woman was just pretending, she wasn't really pregnant. The doctor harshly criticizes Pirateke, who says he will resign. The doctor retorts that he cannot let him leave as everything happening is his responsibility. Pirateke must inform the president's envoy that he did not listen to the president's message, as he had already reached Aruba with the money. In Lima, the police commissioner parks his car right in the middle of the runway. Captain Wilches has no choice but to land. Ulysses prepares for a crash landing and asks Barbara about the safest seat on the plane. Seeing the plane approaching, the commissioner and his deputy panic. Experienced Wilches manages to avoid the police car and lands on the runway, though only a small portion remains to stop the plane. Wilches skillfully steers the plane off the runway, narrowly avoiding the airport building. Both pilots realize they just barely escaped death. In the cabin, Ulysses is equally shaken. The commissioner surrounds the plane with his forces and announces over the loudspeaker that they will refuel the plane and allow it to leave as soon as possible. Toro suggests leaving the plane in Lima itself, saying the money they have is sufficient and they are lucky to be alive. Using the hostages as shields, they demand the commissioner's car keys. The commissioner pretends to hand over the keys and instructs Toro to retrieve them, who in turn wants Edilma to get them. At this moment, the commissioner's foolish deputy fires a shot, leading the rest of the police officers to start shooting. Ulysses fires back in retaliation. The commissioner somehow manages to stop the gunfire. When it stops, Wilches notices blood on Edilma's shirt. Everyone assumes Edilma has been shot, but it turns out the bullet hit Toro. Ulysses assures Toro that nothing will happen to him and orders the hostesses to give him first aid. At Piratek's office, the president's envoy, the vice minister of defense arrives and immediately begins berating Piratek. He accuses him of making the president his enemy but offers to help if Piratek takes all the blame for the hijacking. The envoy promises that once he becomes the senior minister, he will secure Piratek's release. Piratek flatly refuses. The minister suggests blaming Miss Manchola instead, claiming someone must take the fall. On the plane, Toro's bleeding doesn't stop. Wilches suggests surrendering to get Toro medical treatment, but Ulysses refuses, not wanting to go to jail. Meanwhile, the plane finishes refueling, and the commissioner warns them again to leave. Ulysses begs Edilma to save Toro's life. Toro, recalling his mother, holds Edilma's hand, who herself is a mother of 3. Ulysses threatens Wilches, ordering him to start the plane. Ulysses appears visibly broken for the first time. Leaving Lima behind, the plane sets off for an unknown destination. Barbara faces a moral dilemma. She considers injecting Toro with the wrong medicine, which could kill him. Wilches asks Ulysses about their plan and destination, mentioning that they are running out of fuel again. Ulysses says they will head south and land in a desert. Wilches warns that the plane will sink into the sand and explode. Hearing this, Guillermo hastily fastens his seatbelt. Ulysses thanks Barbara and Edilma, also apologizing to them. This changes Barbara's mind. Seizing an opportunity, Captain Wilches redirects the plane toward Bogotá. The vice minister immediately calls the president, joyfully announcing that the plane will be shot down upon entering Colombian airspace, securing his promotion to defense minister. The minister then calls the army chief. Piratek locks his cabin under the pretense of using the restroom and rushes to the radio, to warn Captain Wilches. Seeing this, the vice minister goes mad. Before the minister's bodyguards arrive, Piratek manages to alert Wilches. In the cockpit, Captain Wilches declares that even God cannot land the plane in a desert. Hearing this, Guillermo stands up and pleads with Edilma to check his wounded leg. Ulysses dislikes this but is calmed down by Edilma. Once settled, Guillermo informs Adilma that Wilches is taking the plane to Bogotá, where they might be killed. Adilma uses the excuse of fetching another medical kit to contact Wilches. He confirms that they are heading to Bogotá, where their survival chances are higher. Adilma disagrees with his plan, saying she will inform Ulysses. Wilches asks whose side she is on. Adilma replies that she is on her children's side. Wilches retorts that if that were true, she wouldn't have boarded the plane in the first place. Preparations for a military operation begin in Bogotá. The military colonel asks whether the hijackers are wanted alive or dead. The vice minister says he doesn't care. Meanwhile, Manchola comforts the novice attendant. Just then, William arrives with his brothers, demanding to know where their mother is. On the plane, Adilma looks for a pen to recreate her erased mark. She remembers a constellation of 4 stars her son William had pointed out one night as they lay on the roof with their mother. Adilma records a final message for her children. Everyone on board begins to feel that the end is near. Eusebio reveals his real name to Barbara and thanks her again, blaming his circumstances for his actions. Barbara declares that regardless, he is a killer, but she begins to doubt Eusebio's silence. She asks Adilma to open the cargo hatch. Eusebio doesn't want it opened, but Barbara insists that she is starting to believe he is not a killer and that he was forced into it. Upon opening the hatch, they find the passenger alive. Eusebio hadn't shot him. The passenger is terrified. Toro calls Eusebio a liar and deceiver. Adilma tells Wilches the truth and suggests informing Bogotá that they are willing to surrender. Toro doesn't want to go to jail and accuses Eusebio of being a traitor who framed him. He declares that he has chosen death over surrender and pulls the pin from a grenade. Eusebio tries to stop him. Adilma informs Wilches about the grenade, but Wilches refuses to change course, determined to head to Bogotá. Adilma points Eusebio's gun at Captain Wilches, demanding he change direction. Guillermo too pleads with him, but Wilches labels them all traitors. Adilma, unable to shoot Wilches, grabs a nearby screwdriver and stabs him in the thigh. The fate of Flight 601 becomes uncertain. The curtain rises on an unknown location, where a police officer introduces himself and questions Adilma about the whereabouts of the hijackers. The women claim the hijackers disappeared and took Captain Wilches with them. Media awaits them on the tarmac, but authorities whisk them away for questioning. In another scene, Marulanda interacts with the alive passengers and also gets slapped across his face. Adilma finally sees William through a glass window. The vice minister interrogates each crew member, trying to uncover the fate of the hijackers and Captain Wilches. Gradually, it is revealed that the plane landed somewhere in the dark of night. Barbara doesn't know the exact location. The vice minister continuously threatens them. Eventually, Adilma reveals that as soon as the hijackers heard about a military operation, they pulled out grenades and prepared to blow up the plane. They didn't want to go to jail. However, the brave Captain Wilches tried to save everyone until the end. The hijackers injured him with a screwdriver, forcing Guillermo to take control of the plane. Even in his injured state, Captain Wilches confronted the hijackers. In reality, Adilma had taken control of the plane. She assures Toro that he won't go to jail and convinces him they aren't heading to Bogotá. Adilma tells Toro to trust her because she saved his life, stating they were all victims of the circumstances. Placing a gun in Toro's hand, she tells him that everything is now in his hands. Eusebio says it's time to go home. Recounting the events to the minister, Adilma explains how Wilches calmed the hijackers with his words. Wilches had a plan to keep everyone alive. The minister questions whether Captain Wilches joined the hijackers. Adilma vehemently denies this, stating that Wilches only wanted to save lives. Pointing at a map, Guillermo explains that Wilches instructed him to disable the transponder at a specific location and lower the plane to 3,000 feet, making it invisible to radar. The minister asks if the plane then vanished into thin air. Adilma clarifies that the hijackers demanded 72 hours of silence in exchange for keeping Wilches alive. Barbara adds that they were also subjected to beatings during this time. In reality, Eusebio wanted to take Barbara hostage as well so that everyone would remain silent for 72 hours. Adilma advised him that taking Wilches instead would be more effective. She explained to Eusebio that Wilches was the biggest threat, as he would reveal everything about them at the first opportunity. Guillermo tells the minister that the brave captain sacrificed himself instead of the women. Adilma says Captain Wilches is a true hero in real life. On the plane, Wilches told Adilma that he would not let her go when given the chance. Adilma explained to him that if he followed her advice, he could become a hero. Despite the situation, Wilches insulted her. The minister acknowledges Wilches' bravery but asks where he landed. Guillermo explains that he landed the plane at the outer edge of the runway, where the three of them escaped through the hatch, and the plane took off again. The minister asks which airport it was. Guillermo, maintaining his promise to the captain, refuses to disclose the location. The minister threatens him with severe consequences. Nervous, Guillermo points at Mendoza Airport. Minister jumps at the phone to call the president. Just then Guillermo names another airport. When the minister becomes angry, Guillermo names a third airport, claiming they landed at a distance from all three airports and doesn't know the exact one. To break Idilma, the minister threatens to take her children away from her. This causes Idilma to break down, and she agrees to reveal everything. Marulanda breaks the story, revealing that the hijackers landed in Argentina. Guillermo admits that he put Captain Wilches' life in danger by revealing the truth. Now, we see Captain Wilches with the two hijackers in a jungle. Toro expresses his desire to return home to give money to his family and relatives. Eusebio doesn't want to go with him but doesn't stop him either. Once Toro leaves, Eusebio instructs Wilches to cross the river. Wilches is convinced that this is his end. Idilma wants to change her statement to save Barbara and Guillermo but is interrupted by the grand entry of Captain Wilches. Idilma expresses her joy at seeing him alive. The minister asks him to read the statements of the three crew members. Wilches carefully reads the statements and looks at Idilma. After finishing, the minister asks if he has anything to add. Wilches agrees, and the minister starts recording. Wilches admits that everything is true except for his wig. Idilma can't believe her ears. Finally, she gets a chance to meet her children. Guillermo's family also comes to receive him. Barbara reunites with her friends. The story jumps a month ahead. Manchola visits Pirateki in jail, where he has been sentenced to 17 months. Pirateki expresses his desire to marry her, and Manchola agrees. The president awards Captain Wilches for his bravery. 7 years later, Wilches dies in a plane crash. Barbara visits Idilma to say goodbye, expressing her wish to resign and return home. Idilma thanks her for standing by her side on the 601 ordeal. Toro, upon returning home, distributed money throughout his neighborhood, which caught the police's attention. He was arrested and extradited to Colombia, where he served 5 years in prison. Eusebio stops at a small bar in Brazil, where Barbara was waiting for him. Idilma continued flying for another 3 years but was not promoted as promised. She was eventually fired for smuggling alcohol.